Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this episode, we are going to work on the charging system on the Supra. So in the previous video, showed a little bit of what we have going on here. And obviously have the alternator here, I have the front motor plate, and I need to make these things work harmoniously together and tension the alternator belt. So I went ahead and I ordered these two belts, both Jones belts, and one of them is slightly longer than the other, and they should in theory work with the belt length measurements that I had taken previously off camera. So what we need to do to make all of this work is I need to make a slotted elongated hole in the motor plate, so that way this fastener that will go through this eyelet right here can be tightened down on the back side. We need to put a time cert somewhere in this area right here that will allow this little heim joint turnbuckle right here to be housed and go into its home. And I need to come in and remove a little bit more material from the motor plate, probably in this area right here. And what I don't have materials to do right now, but what I am going to do is, since I've removed so much material on the bottom side, I'm going to take and I'll measure the thickness of this block, or this piece of aluminum. I'll get a piece of plate and I'll build a top section to it, weld that on, just to give it a little bit more strength and to ease my worries a little bit. So the first thing that we need to do is come in here and I will need to mark out what additional material needs to be removed from the motor plate. And at that point, I can go ahead and pull the timing belt. I'll probably end up pulling the radiator out as well. Essentially get the front end disassembled to make the front of the engine accessible and able to be worked with. And then I can pull the motor plate off and we can move forward from there. Well, the floor received an inadvertent yet unavoidable washing, which actually isn't a bad thing. But however, the radiator is now removed. So I can go ahead and lower the car back down, then mark out where on that motor plate I need to remove additional material. I can pull the plate out, remove the material, put it back in. And at that point, we can mark out where our elongated hole needs to be drilled and move forward with this project. With a little bit of off-camera work, we now have that front motor plate removed, for the time being at least, and it's over here on the vertical saw. And I have right here the area marked out that I need to remove. So I'm hoping that this last bit right in through there, that obviously that blue trace right there, will be enough to make the alternator clear the way that it needs to. So I'm going to plug the vertical saw in, make this cut, and then we can test fit the front motor plate, make sure that everything is good to go with it, and if everything checks out, then we can mark out for our holes and get those drilled. After a bit of notching and all that type of work, we now have we're in alternator location that will work. It allows me to rock the alternator up to this position to easily remove and install the belt, and then it can rock back out into that position to make it so it can be tensioned and all will be well there. So in looking at this a little bit more, I don't need to start making my elongated hole until, about that point, maybe a little bit farther. So as you can see, I do have a center punch, or a transfer punch in place. So what I'm going to do is gently tap the transfer punch. Actually, I pull the belt off and then gently tap the transfer punch in a few different locations to make kind of an arced template, if you will. And that will give me an idea of how and where I need to drill. And then I can drill the holes, clean everything up, make one consistent, one singular elongated hole out of a handful of individual 7/16 holes. So let's go ahead and mark that out, and then we can get started on this portion of this project. And just like that, we have our slotted hole. So once I get this side of the turnbuckle fastened down, as it pushes out, it will be the slotted hole serves as a guide for this bolt to go along its travel. So it won't need to be tensioned that much. This belt is a pretty good size for what I have going on here, but I at least wanted to give it a track to travel and have a fastener on that actual alternator side like I do right now. So it's just a long bolt, nut on the back side, washers throughout, and I just wanted to have that for a little bit more stability rather than just having that lower pivot fastener be the only point of retention for the for the alternator. So now that I have all of this side squared away, I can focus on this side, and all that I need to do should be relatively simple. I just need to come in with my transfer punch, mark out where the hole needs to go, punch the hole, or punch the center punch, drill the hole, put a time cert in place, and at that point, the alternator tensioner is pretty much done. So let me pull this all back apart, or let me get this marked out first rather, then pull it all back apart, and we'll proceed from there. Let's take a minute to talk about the anatomy of a turnbuckle. So, what a turnbuckle is, or what it's comprised of, you have a right-hand thread and left-hand thread, in this case, heim joint or rod end, and then in the center, you have a union piece that has right-hand threads on one side, left-hand threads on the other. So what you end up with, see if I can do this so you guys can see, is a piece that when you spin it, rather than the two pieces moving along with, or rather than essentially threading a nut in moving the centerpiece just left or right, the fact that the threads move in an opposite manner makes the rod ends, in this case, extend or retract in unison. So these are very handy for something like this tensioner that we're building, or pretty much anything along those lines. So again, very simple, right-hand thread, left-hand thread, a centerpiece with both right-hand and left-hand threads respectively, and the purpose of it is allowing you to tension or detension a piece that you're working on. So hopefully that makes sense, and just a brief little explanation of it, but now let's go ahead and put this baby on the Supra. The alternator tensioner works flawlessly. I'm very happy with how it came out and very happy that it works as well as it does. Now, like we said, it's a pretty simple principle the way that it works. Our turnbuckle, as it is spun, will extend outward. Therefore, we have a fixed point here and a pivot point down on the bottom of the alternator. So as this extends, this is fixed, the bottom is fixed, but we have our slot here. So the only way that it can go is outward, and thus applying tension to the belt and keeping everything happy and working the way that it should. So that will work out perfectly, and I'm very happy with it. But now I'll have to tear this back apart now that that's tested and all is well there, as this material here is getting quite thin, and I'm going to put some additional material on the top to make up for what I've removed on the bottom side in order to get the alternator to fit in its proper location. So that, welding that piece on, that will be for another day. I don't believe I have material that is matching to or to the thickness of the motor plate the way that it is. So we'll knock that out another day, or I may even do it I may even do it off camera, but at least I know at this point that tensioner works, and I'll just have to get a couple of jam nuts for it, and then everything will be squared away there, and the alternator will, in theory and hopefully, regulate and generate the voltage that the car needs to run. So the next thing that I would like to knock out in this video is terminating the wires for the line lock solenoid. So I have these two wires right here that go down to my solenoid, and I have this end that Russ left. So, to provide me the opportunity to go ahead to crimp my own end onto it, or crimp my own terminals onto it, put my own connector onto it, and in theory at that point we will have a working line lock solenoid. So I ordered a couple of materials, and nothing too fancy or anything like that, but just working with more of the same of what we already had. If you remember my China Bay Deutsch connector kit, and I went ahead and took the liberty to set the depth appropriately on the actual crimp tool. Now, this isn't like a normal mil-spec or solid contact or barrel pin tool, in that a normal one has a turret on it. This just has this adjustable depth stop, but for our use here, that works out perfectly fine. So I have that tool, and over here, I think everything should be in here. Maybe not, but I at least have my connectors. So ordered just a simple little 5-piece connector kit. So I needed a female connector, and I think the only one in here, the lock is broken for it. So I guess in theory I could use this one, but one way or another we'll get a connector on there. So let me go ahead and get set up and ready to do this. I just have to go figure out where I put my little sleeve of Raychem, and then we'll be ready to go, ready to rock, and knocking this line lock solenoid out. There we go. The line lock solenoid is all wired. I used Raychem DR25 for the actual heat shrink tubing, and I also used some little epoxy lined or epoxy impregnated heat shrink just to seal up the ends of it as best I could. You can see where my ring finger is right there. That's what we're looking at, and then of course the Deutsch connector on the end of it. So I can go ahead and reinstall this in the car at this point, tighten the lines back down, and once I reconnect the alternator, we can power the car up and test and make sure that this actually does click and all is well. All right, so we power on and then hit the line lock button. We have power now. I don't think that anything bad is going to happen unless I try to bump the engine over, which I am not going to do. But if I hit the main power and line lock, sounds like it's working. So that is another thing knocked off of the list. Pretty happy, even though it's just a stupid, simple little thing. But one less thing to do. and I got to wire something, so that's pretty cool in and of itself. So even though we didn't get a whole lot accomplished today, was still able to knock a couple of small projects off of the list, and I was very pressed for time today. I just got in late today from being out at a race for the past 2 days, but I still wanted to get something done, and I was able to do that. So again, we went ahead and got our little alternator tensioner pretty well roughed in. I measured out for the addition piece that I'll put on the top of the motor plate here, just to add a little bit more strength to it. And I went ahead and I wired the line lock solenoid, and we just tested it. So like I said, not anything earth-shattering on this episode, but still things that needed to be checked off of the list, and still progress made on the car, which is exactly what I was going for. So once we get the alternator and the motor stuff, or the motor plate stuff, sorted out, then all of this disaster can go back together, and we can test fire it and make sure that we are actually generating voltage, which at that point in time, the car will be self-sustaining electrically, and that'll be a huge victory and one less thing to worry about. But again, that won't happen today. That'll be probably the next episode, and we'll have to wait until then to knock that out. But until then, thank you guys as always for tuning in, for watching me work around here. Projects big, projects complicated, projects small, projects easy like the ones that we were working on today, but they are all little bits of the big picture. And the big picture for this thing is very rapidly reaching the completion point. So very happy about that. But before I ramble on any more, that'll be the end of this episode. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one.